Morning. My name is Chuck Cully. I'm a producer in Virginia, Atlanta, Georgia. This year I'm federally serving and had the privilege to serve as chairman of the National Cotton Council. And before I get to introducing our president and CEO, Dr. Mark Lange, I'd like to recognize some of the other council staff here. Craig Brown. If you don't know him, try to meet Craig. He's vice president in charge of producers affairs. And Jim Davis. Jim, are you in here? But Jim's there he is. Jim's the southeastern field rep, so get to know them. But it's been a privilege, like I said, to serve as chairman, and being served as chairman, you get to see how much work goes into the staff of the National Cotton Council. They are 24/7 cotton. They're ahead of the curve on most of the problems and hopefully solve most of the problems. But it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Mark Lange, who's been with the council since 1990. We're in the late 1990s when the cotton prices fell. He got this thing that should be called Dr. Doom, but he's moved on to be the chairman and CEO. President and CEO. I'm chairman. So, and I appreciate he's been there. He became chairman, president and CEO in 2003. And we had Mark resides in Memphis with his lovely wife Janice, and we're proud to have him here to speak to the Georgia Cotton Commission Conference. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and to be in Georgia. Of course, Georgia's contribution to cotton leadership has been extraordinary because you provided tremendous support to the National Cotton Council, but also tremendous leadership. Bob McClendon is the past chairman of the National Cotton Council. Of course, Chuck Coley is the current chairman. Chuck has also served as chairman of the American Cotton Producers. And last night we had an opportunity to celebrate the leadership and retirement of Louis Perry, and he's been a tremendous leader in Georgia cotton and in the U.S. cotton industry, and also served as chairman of CI. I think this pretty well summarizes the Washington situation. For all of us, especially for folks in agriculture and production agriculture, what Washington has been planting is uncertainty. And I know that most of you were extremely pleased that, in fact, the resolution of the fiscal cliff that occurred right there at the beginning of this year provided for an extension of the 2012 provisions for 2013 for a farm bill. And most of us hailed that as being a good thing on the part of Congress. But as I'll get into in a minute, one of the things that it has left as an uncertainty is what will happen to the necessary funding that agriculture needs to write the next farm bill. Because you're all aware there were no cuts made to agricultural spending for 2013 compared to 2012. And we all knew that the baseline that Congress was wrestling with to write a 5-year farm bill, well, they were talking about cuts somewhere in the neighborhood of about $30 billion over a 10-year period. So the real question now for those of us that follow this policy so closely, and eventually for you who have to operate in that policy, is will Congress then expect to make 5 years of cuts on 4 years of farm programming when it writes the next farm program? And I think everybody in Congress is wrestling with that. You all know the trouble that we have with budgets and spending, and everybody's concerned about what spending authority will be. And so just what will Congress have in its pot of money to write farm bill for the next 4 years is still uncertain. In 2011 and 2012, this characterized most of the issues that we were working with on the Hill. Budget constraints, and as we've talked about, a 30% reduction in funding expected over a 10-year period as you looked at spending cuts, heavily pushed by the freshman Democrats that came in 2010. And then with high prices that were in existence in a good part of 11 and 12, and not just, cotton had a spike, but steady high prices for some grains and oilseeds, it left a taste in Congress that said, we don't need direct payments anymore. Why are we making payments to producers during periods of high prices? You heard that all the time. And so it was clear that when Congress began serious deliberations on farm policy, the one thing that there was almost unanimity over was we'll get rid of direct payments. And then for cotton in particular, the other policy problem that we have faced now for many years is what to do. How do we resolve the ongoing WTO case on cotton with Brazil? And the thing that most people, we even talk about it is because it's very personal to us, it's a cotton case, but there is a very important second component to that case, and that is the export credit guarantee component. And that applies not just to cotton's export guarantee program, but export guarantee for all agricultural commodities in the U.S. So it's going to impact any resolution of that, impacts not only the grains and oilseeds, but also the livestock and specialty crop folks who also make heavy use of export credit guarantees. To sort of set the stage for why we are sitting where we are today, of course, the current law expired on September 30. Now, the way that law works is it covered the crop that was being harvested in the fall of 12 through its marketing year, essentially through July of 13. But for some crops, that wasn't the case. The dairy program actually expired on January 1. And the programs that Kevin Latner was up here talking about that Cotton Council International uses, which is the MAP and FMD programs, those were eliminated on September 30. And we went into the fall with wheat being planted and no one knowing when they planted wheat exactly what would be the program they'd end up harvesting that wheat under. Now, I think most of you are aware that if Congress failed to take any action whatsoever, there's a fallback, and that is you revert to what's called permanent law, which is all swings off parity prices, and nobody wanted to talk about that. But you actually would have had wheat, if Congress hadn't done anything early this spring sometime, wheat would have been harvested, and it would have been at parity prices, which would have been about $13 a bushel and for loan program purposes. So Congress had plenty of incentive to get a resolution to the Farm Bill impasse. As we went into the fall further, we had elections in November, and I think most of us anticipated in late summer that there was actually an opportunity for the Republicans to garner further seats in the House, but that was not how the elections turned out. The Republicans actually lost seats. The leadership in the House now is unchanged. Chairman of the House Ag Committee remains Mr. Lucas out of Oklahoma, and the Ranking Member Peterson continues in their positions. We did see Congressman Aderholt out of Alabama is now the Chair of Appropriations, Ag Appropriations, and Nunes in California becomes Chair of Ways and Means Trade Subcommittee. In the Senate, again, there was an expectation that early on that perhaps the Republicans could gain control of the Senate. Instead, in the Senate, the Democrats retained control and added 2 seats. Leaders in the Senate remain largely unchanged. There are some new cottonbelt senators there, but leadership is largely unchanged with a major exception, and that is in the Senate Ag Committee, the ranking member is now Senator Cochran out of Mississippi, instead of Senator Roberts out of Kansas. So that was a big change as far as southern crops are concerned, because I think you're all well aware, peanuts especially was distraught over what the Senate was doing on agricultural policy. And I believe we all see Senator Cochran as being someone who tried to deliver more reasonable policy for Southern agriculture. And then we finished the election and we went into a lame duck, and there was some opportunity maybe to do some farm legislation in lame duck, and then it became clear that the lame duck session was going to be completely unproductive. And I love this cover on The Economist magazine with Uncle Sam and Lady Liberty flying off the cliff, oblivious. And that's Congress, in my opinion. I mean, that just characterizes Congress. I mean, throw money out the side, let's party on. Is there a problem here? You know, at some point, I think Americans are going to get sick and tired of a Congress that uses the U.S. economy as a punching bag and its own tool. And I think at some point they're going to pay a price for it. They haven't yet. As we wound up the year, the American Taxpayer Relief Act, I like that one, the American Taxpayer Relief Act. Virtually every American saw their taxes go up, was passed. It introduced means testing for your individual income tax rate. Other people now know what means testing is. Agriculture's known about it for a good while. Now, the rest of the world gets to know about means testing. And they did it for individual income tax rates as well as the dividend and capital gains rates. They did make, I think, necessary, desirable adjustments to estate taxes. They put in place a $5 million exemption and capped the top rate at 40%. They also did something that was important. They did address AMT relief, but the thing they didn't do, and that's why I said there was a major tax increase in here, was they did not extend the payroll tax cut. And the payroll tax cut, of course, applies to about 73% of all income earners in the United States, and it increased their payroll taxes by 2%. Now, what did it do in agriculture? Well, as I noted, it extended the provisions of 2012. Notice I didn't say it extended the 08 Farm Bill. It extended the provisions of 2012 because there are things in the 08 Farm Bill that weren't active in 2012 and therefore are not active today, like the SURE program, okay? There is no SURE program. There were other programs that had no baseline in 2012 and they were not extended for this package. Now the direct and the countercyclical programs and the marketing loan programs are all extended under the same language present in 2012. The other thing it didn't do was the House and the Senate had largely agreed to some new dairy policy, but instead it just kept the old dairy policy. It did not put in new dairy policy. And there was a lot of hope early on that perhaps they would, but as you heard earlier, Speaker Boehner didn't care for that new policy, and so it was not in there. The last thing it did was it authorized disaster assistance for livestock. But notice I said it authorized it, it didn't fund it. It left it to appropriators to fund, and given what the problems the appropriators are going to have with spending, disaster assistance for livestock would be pushing a pretty heavy rope up a hill, I think, to get it. Now, what Congress left itself with was a number of other cliffs. We saw one coming at the time they did the Taxpayer Relief Act. Everybody anticipated, well, they've got a debt ceiling. They've kicked the debt ceiling down the road now a little ways, but we still have it. It's going to be a little further out. And we have sequestration now looming at us. If Congress does nothing between now and February 28th or March 1st, sequestration will take place. For non-defense spending, that cut is a little over 8%. And so that means that all checks issued after February 8th will be cut by the sequestered amount, a little over 8%. And defense spending, it's higher than that. If you hear some Republicans talk, their view is it might be best to just let sequestration go on and try to come to a resolution on all spending in a debt ceiling, a new debt ceiling resolution later in the spring. And so I'm not going to handicap whether they're going to do something prior to March the 1st to fix this, or whether they're going to let it all get wrapped up into a new debt ceiling discussion. It's not clear to me what their intentions are. The other thing that they have our continuing resolution back before they adjourned for the election. Congress passed a continuing resolution that funded government through the 27th of March. On the 28th of March, if Senate and Congress, and if the Congress does nothing, government essentially runs out of money and has to cease operation. So Congress will do something. I think both parties realize that playing a game with running out of funds and shutting the government down gains you nothing when it comes to the next election. They'll do something, but every time they have to do something, just remember that's an opportunity for cuts to come. It's an opportunity for someone on the floor to offer up a way to save money. And agriculture, every time that happens, agriculture has always been considered low-hanging fruit for folks to go after. We should expect it. Every time there'll be action on the floor that's anything more than a comprehensive up or down vote for a package. Back right after the new year, there was indication by both the House and the Senate that they would begin work early. Talk about another farm bill. Chairman Stabenow has said that in her view, her committee completed its work and will simply resubmit that Senate package for consideration by the Senate. And they're not hearing any real pushback yet for that approach in the Senate. In the House, there was greater discussion about having a true markup in the House by the House Ag Committee that just picking up where they essentially finished their work, they might have more things to do. Chairman Lucas early on said, well, maybe we could do this before the end of February in order to capture the baseline that we were working with all last year and have that pot of money. Then we know a good pot of money we have to work with to write a farm bill. He's been quoted in the last 2 days as saying now he doesn't believe it's possible to get the committee to move that quickly, that early summer looks like a more likely timetable for the House Ag Committee to pick up the discussion. And he's also said that he's doing that fully acknowledging that there's no way of knowing today what the baseline that agriculture will have to write a farm bill from. That there's just no way of knowing now whether we'll be able to keep what we have to absorb deeper cuts, just what baseline will be available. And so the problem for us, I mean those of us and those of you in production agriculture, is we're now pushing that uncertainty again farther into the future. Again, you may be almost to getting ready to harvest this crop and still be uncertain as to what the rules are for the following crop. And we all anticipate that at some point, and then most likely for 2014, the farm programs that you operate under will be substantially different than the programs you've seen essentially since 2002 and that you've been operating with. And to the degree to which Congress can move faster rather than slower on that to give you and your operations and your lenders and your downstream folks that you deal with greater confidence as that we all understand the system under which things will be grown and shipped, that's really necessary. But getting it done sooner doesn't appear to be in Congress's calendar right now. The other part of getting this thing done, a new farm bill that's particular again to just cotton, is hopefully whatever that legislative language is that's in there for cotton has satisfied Brazil. That in the end, Brazil's not ready to retaliate on the U.S. cotton program or the U.S. Export Credit Guarantee program. And the reason for that is, just keep in mind, back in 2009, an arbitrator made the final ruling that there were no more appeals on this Brazil case in the WTO, and granted Brazil the opportunity to retaliate against $800 million worth of U.S. goods going into Brazil. Now, it wasn't just cotton, it could have been any goods going into Brazil. And Brazil then began to assemble the list, just like you do in the United States. You have a Federal Register notice, and they put out a process. There was a committee that would be establishing the list. There would be a review process as to who got on the list and what the duties would be. They were going through that process. And they were following the timeline that they set up. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce went into high gear, as you would anticipate they would. Brazil never came close to actually putting on any tariffs, because when the Chamber entered in, the U.S. government then got active in negotiating with the Brazilians and said, wait a minute, we're in no position right now to rewrite farm policy, agricultural policy. There's got to be a way of addressing this. So they created a thing called the Framework Agreement. The Framework Agreement provides that the U.S. government will pay the Brazilians $147 million a year, while the U.S. Congress and government are waiting for new farm policy. So, given that this change, or this new policy that we have isn't a change in farm policy, the U.S. government's going to have to get an agreement from the Brazilians to continue to accept the $147 million. At the same time, that makes us vulnerable, because if members of Congress decide that another $147 million paid to the Brazilians is not a good use of U.S. taxpayer funds during a period of fiscal restraint, if they don't pay the funds, then Brazil's going to get aggravated and start talking about retaliation, in which case, again, you isolate cotton. So hopefully we found some legislation in the Senate package that the Brazilians see as a way of a placeholder for discussion, at least. And we can protect that $147 million payment until new legislation is in fact enacted by this Congress. Now, so far I've spent a lot of time talking about Congress and Farm Bill, but there are a lot of other things that the National Cotton Council is involved in beyond the WTO case and Farm Bill. There is a countervailing duty case that's been started by a Peruvian government agency, where the Peruvian government's considering whether to levy countervailing duties against imports of U.S. cotton by Peruvian mills. There's a announcement now by the WTO that in December of 2013 they will hold a ministerial in Indonesia, and there's already been a pronouncement by the developing country caucus inside the WTO that there ought to be an early harvest of things that have been largely agreed upon in this Doha round, and get those in place, even though the Doha round itself is dragging on. And every time they talk about that, they'll talk about an early harvest for cotton. And if you'll recall, back in 2005, there was a ministerial in Hong Kong in which there was a text that came out and talked about all these good things the Doha round is going to achieve. And in addition to that, for cotton, there would be greater and faster cuts. So they always talk about we could incorporate that today. We don't have to wait for a Doha agreement. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which holds some real threat to our U.S. textile industry if we don't get a yarn forward rule of origin in it, will be moving forward this year. I think most of you are aware that virtually every U.S. merchant and other merchants around the world have suffered from contract defaults by mills in foreign countries. These are not contract defaults by U.S. mills, they're contract defaults by mills in foreign countries. They have endangered a total now of about $1 billion worth of cotton contracts. These are foreign mills that are laying down on agreements, and they are hazarding U.S. shipments, and they're hazarding the livelihood of some U.S. merchandising operations. And ultimately, you know what happens when merchants have troubles. Those mills will see a different basis But as the merchant faces added risk, what happens to basis to the U.S. grower? We know what happens. Basis widens as the merchant feels he faces greater risk in being able to move any negotiated contract. We still have lots of work to do in crop insurance in a number of areas. We're continuing our work there. We have thankfully seen some rain now in the Mississippi Basin, both in the very far north regions and in the Ohio River. We are seeing some easing of the traffic on the Mississippi River. That'll give some better access to cottonseed moving up the river, as well as fertilizer shipments that need to go upriver. There's been a temporary halt to a labor dispute on the East Coast, but they need to get that resolved. That is not resolved. It's just an agreement to suspend the labor action. Looks like immigration reform will be moving forward in this Congress. The other regulatory issues you see up there are the permitting problem. EPA is continued to press on pollinator issues. There's a concern that pesticide use is damaging pollinators, and EPA is threatening more aggressive regulatory action on chemicals that impact pollinators. And there continues to be a lot of work on the area of the Endangered Species Act, because there are a number of NGOs, environmentalists, who argue that EPA is not doing the necessary consultations that it's supposed to do on wildlife and fish before it does product registrations. And there's a large lawsuit that we are part of in order to protect the American agricultural producer and give him a seat at the table in any negotiations involving endangered species action and product registration. Of course, we continue in the area of biotechnology registration. That is key to the efficiency of U.S. cotton growers. And lastly, as Cater mentioned, sustainability is a big issue for a number of brands, retailers, and products. But it's also become a regulatory issue. There have been groups, in particular some organic groups, who have attempted to hijack sustainability and make sustainability synonymous with organic. That is, you cannot call yourself sustainable if you are not organic. And so one of the big efforts we have in working with CI and their work in sustainability is to ensure that we have sound science and reasonable definitions are applied in any effort on the part of the U.S. government to work in the area of defining sustainability. So cliffs are everywhere. If you've listened to Joe Nicosia in the last 30 days, you've heard him express a great deal of concern about what might happen to cotton prices if China does this or China does that. The other thing that I've heard a great deal about is what may happen to grain and oilseed prices if you actually have average yields on grains and oilseeds for what's planted in 2013, given the expectation now of over 96 million acres planted in corn alone in the U.S. for 2013. And if you had average yields on that, that would be corn prices and oilseed prices probably in the fall. I don't want to see things like that happen to those prices, but I would like to see a more reasonable price relationship develop between our fiber and the grains and oilseed. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions, and I again want to express my thanks to the Georgia Cotton Commission for its years of support to the U.S. cotton industry and the great leadership it provides every year to the U.S. industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. After hearing what Mark said, his comments, understand that the council represents us on all areas of the waterfront and does a tremendous job. And Georgia is one of the largest state supporter of the National Cotton Council, and we appreciate what you do. Anybody got any questions for Mark or any of our other speakers? We've got a minute or so. You guys did good. No questions. A couple of things I want to do is introduce some folks. Let's see. Mr. Wavell Robinson, producer member of our board, I don't think we saw him in the room when the program started, but he's here with us now, Wavell. Also, we have Joe McManus, who's representing Georgia Farm Bureau President Duval here today. President Duval is an ex officio member of each and every commission. And Nathan Wilson is here from Commissioner Black's office, and he represents the department during our meetings. Two old friends who work for our senators, Debbie Cannon, Jody Redding. They support us, they work with us, and their bosses have done a tremendous job for us. And Debbie and Jody, we really appreciate y'all, and thank you for being here today. A couple of other folks who work for you as producers, Jim Wilson, who is Executive Director of the Georgia Boll Weevil Eradication Foundation. Billy Sanders is a member of his board, there with him. Monty Bain, Regional Communications Director for the Cotton Board. Jim Davis and Craig Brown from the National Cotton Council. David Rupenicker from Southern Cotton Growers. And two of our advisory board members, Matt Coley and Chad Mathis. We appreciate all y'all being here and what you do for us. As Georgia has grown and maintained a position of prominence in the cotton industry, we've had individuals who have been able to move up and give some of their good Georgia leadership and experience and advice to our organizations. And Chuck Coley, who's been chairman of the council this year, has done a tremendous job. Jimmy Webb, who is chairman of the board of Cotton Council International, has also done a good job. And let's give these two fellows thanks for taking time with us. And believe it or not, we are just a few minutes ahead. Lunch is going to be served over in banquet rooms A, B, and C. Be over in the new part. They'll have it ready just as soon as they can. But in the meantime, please stop by and visit with the exhibitors. And thank you for attending today. And thank you for your support of the Georgia Cotton Commission. We work hard for you every day.